What is up, guys? Today we are talking about a moment that truly changed the sport of World Cup downhill racing. I know people like to talk about lots of moments that changed this and that. Aaron Gwynn's 2015, I believe, Leo Gang chainless win. I believe it was 2015. They say that changed downhill. It didn't. The introduction of 29-inch wheels, again, yeah, the riders went a couple seconds faster, but that's about it. Typically, these moments that seem really significant at the time very rarely amount to much, but that is most certainly not the case for what we're talking about today. And that moment is the 2014 Heffiel World Championships, where Josh Bryceland, at the time the World Cup overall winner, the British National Championship winner, and the rider that was looking poised up until the very last moment to clinch also the World Championship title, until he went a little bit too fast over what was seemingly a innocuous up and over jump. He was up, I believe, 2 or so seconds on the split. He pretty much had it in the bag. All he needed to do was throttle back and pretty much coasted into the finish line, wrapping up what would have been one of the most dominant seasons in the history of downhill. But instead, a moment that would live in infamy, he hits the bridge too fast, overjumps it into oblivion, or ironically, it didn't even look that bad. But unfortunately for Bryceland and fans of downhill, that moment would change the sport forever. Josh Bryceland ultimately ended up breaking his foot essentially in half. A lot of people still think it was a broken ankle. It was what is called a Liz Franks injury. Essentially, the center of his foot pretty much just split in half. You can see a picture where it shows his foot just folded over. And that was obviously not only a significant moment for Josh Bryceland's career, we're going to get into that, but also Aaron Gwynn and Loic Bruni. Now, the year that Bryceland won, to put it into context, the late, great Stevie Smith, who I'm definitely going to be dedicating a video to, after clinching the 2013 World Cup overall title, he actually hurt his ankle, I believe in New Zealand, attempting this cool gap. You can actually see footage of it. But unfortunately, that meant that he was not at his best. Gwynn, in addition to Stevie Smith, this was now the second year on his new Specialized contract. The first year, he was still figuring out the bike. It took quite a bit. I don't know how many of you guys remember it, but it was pretty noteworthy that after two dominant seasons in 2011 and 12, he made a high-profile switch to Specialized, big money. A lot of people believe that that was, if not still is, one of the biggest contracts that a downhill rider signed. He could have been clearing almost $1 million a year, but the first year in 2013 was rough. He struggled adapting to the bike. 2014, he improved, but I would say he was still not yet at his best. And in this kind of power vacuum, Josh Bryceland showed up at the time, 24 years old, did not win a World Cup previous to that year, and ended up, as I had already mentioned, winning 2 World Cups. Another cool stat. I love looking back in the sport because Josh Bryceland actually won the last ever World Cup that was going to be won on a 26-inch bike, 2014 Leo Gang. That was one of 2 wins that year. The other win was at Wyndham. I'm going to touch on that later, but this really was a breakout year for Josh Bryceland, and it's hard to convey how big of a star he was, because now we think of Josh Bryceland as that fun, carefree kind of lifestyle brand ambassador guy, but at the time, 2014, he was looking like he was going to take over the world of downhill. Wyndham is possibly the most emphatic moment of that year, beating Aaron Gwynn on his home track. Josh Bryceland talked about that was one of the hardest he's ever gone in a race run. Another fun kind of quip. If you look back and Google images of that year at Wyndham, Josh Bryceland was actually sporting a black eye. Rumor had it that him, G. Atherton, and I believe Sam Gay or Sam, I'm always bad with names, but they got into a little bit of a tussle at a Mount St. Anne after party. That was the rumor, and Josh Bryceland ended up getting punched by G. I don't know that for sure. If you guys know more of the details, definitely leave a comment. But this just kind of goes to capture what he represented in the sport. Josh Bryceland was the antithesis to Aaron Gwynn, to G. Atherton. It's kind of interesting now, as loved as Aaron Gwynn is in the sport. At the time, Aaron Gwynn was not a particularly popular rider. Partly is that due to jealousy? Absolutely. Anytime you just come onto the scene and start dominating, there's going to be a little bitterness. But there's also some famous interviews that he maybe didn't say what the riders and fans wanted. I remember the one significant one, he said he doesn't love downhill in the way that he would perhaps love his, at the time, girlfriend and later become his wife. People interpreted that as he's kind of like, he's not passionate about it. It was goofy. It was weird. Ironic now that he has invested a huge amount of money, time, and energy into a bike park, a race series. So it's kind of fascinating to see the sort of the narrative around a rider who is now pretty much loved by everybody. But at the time, Aaron Gwynn was not particularly popular. Not that this really had anything to do with Josh Bryceland, but Josh Bryceland was just this rebellious, wild piker from England. He was, I'm pretty sure, routinely celebrating that year's victories and results by getting drunk. I don't know that for sure, but the vibe of him and Petey and Menard, they are kind of the last of that previous generation where you would get wild on the weekend, get drunk, have fun, cause chaos, and still be able to perform. Josh Bryceland was one of those kind of old school characters when you look at Steve Peat, Sean Palmer, a really incredible racer, Nathan Rennie, that does not get nearly enough notoriety. He was just this wild, exciting, kind of lovable character. He was looking like he was going to take over the world of downhill, and certainly when you look at that season, it's pretty clear why. You just look at the results. National champion, World Cup overall, and getting back to the moment at hand, that infamous overshoot of the bridge, breaking his foot dramatically, and even though he would recover, in fact winning a World Cup at Mount St. Anne the following year, what would not recover is his love of the sport and his drive to compete, ultimately in unfortunately leading to his retirement in 2017. His last race, I believe, was the last race in 2016, and he called it quits. And it's hard to communicate how significant this was. And Aaron Gwynn kind of picked up the mantle and won 15, 16, and 17. But looking back, it is really hard to imagine that if that moment did not happen, that Gwynn would have ended up with as many individual World Cup wins and as many World Cup titles, because Bryceland took it to Gwynn. You could say, I'm pretty sure it was near peak Gwynn, certainly towards the second half of the season. I don't think there was any more excuses in terms of the bike, and Wyndham really being kind of the crux example of Bryceland, and Gwynn even mentioned it, just getting flat out beat by Bryceland. So there's no question he had the out and out speed to take it to Gwynn. He had the consistency, and in spite of the antics and the wild personality, he was able to deliver it week in and week out. And so it's wild to imagine how different this sport in the past 10 years would have looked like in terms of results had that moment at Heffiel not happened. He hadn't hurt his foot. He was pretty much going from strength to strength, and it's hard not to imagine him racking up certainly many more World Cup wins, but likely more World Cup titles. And he was only 24 at the time. So we're talking about there was another, 8 or 10 years left of, top level competition. And so this is why, in my opinion, this truly is a moment that changed the sport of downhill, at least in terms of the results in what the following years look like, because Gwynn kind of cleaned house. He dominated from 15, 16 to 17. Nobody was able to match him. Loic Bruni wasn't able to figure out. Loic is a couple years younger than Bryceland, and he's quite a few years younger than Gwynn. So Gwynn was at his peak, and Loic was still kind of, figuring it out. But it would have been a lot more dramatic had Bryceland not gone the way of that unfortunate injury at Heffiel. And I think there would have been many years of a Aaron Gwynn versus Josh Bryceland battle, but that did not happen. Anyways, it is just a really unfortunate part of the sport. These things happen, and a rider that looks like, again, he's on top of the world. He was really going to be a huge star in downhill because he's just such a iconic personality, and you can imagine how lovable he is now. Well, take that and put him in a situation where he is winning World Cup races, beating the likes of Bruni and Gwynn, Menard, Hart, all those hitters. He was the king of the sport. It was short-lived. Anyways, long rant. That is why I believe, unlike many other moments that people talk about, that really did change the sport of downhill. Let me know what you guys think. Does anybody have the exact specifics as to what happened at Mount St. Anne when Josh Bryceland got the black eye? Certainly a funny moment. It's hard to imagine that happening now, but anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment, and yeah,